All right, welcome back. In this episode, I'm discussing turning to the dark side, why good people do evil things. And so just right out of the gate, again, this is all in theory and my observations, but when you look at, I say throughout the last few years specifically, we see a lot of what we'd see on the surface as good people, or at the very least, they appeared to be good people. But again, they committed truly evil acts, and then that's one thing that I've experienced in my life was that I had a good person, and my father, who again he committed an evil act, and that was one of the things for years I struggled with was how simply how could somebody that was who raised me and raised my other siblings, who I looked up to, who I thought was generally a good person, commit an evil act. And so that's one thing that, for so many years, I didn't really think there was a valid answer. I didn't think that there was a legitimate source. I just thought it was almost just like a virus you catch that you literally just comes into contact and consumes you. And in a manner of speaking, it actually kind of is. But I wanted to look deeper into that process, so that we can educate on mental health and how it impacts our actions and blinds us to our actions, to where some people that we would view as good people commit evil acts. And so, look at people like Bill Cosby, or for people who like the show Smallville, like I do, Allison Mack, where you see them committing these evil acts to an extent where you're just like, how in the world did you get there? And so, again, I don't know anything about Bill Cosby or Allison Mack involving their personal life and their mental health state. But again, too, that was one thing that I theorized, reading a little bit about specifically Allison Mack's experience, was that, from my understanding about her involvement in the sex cult, was that the person who started it, I want to say his name was Keith Rainier or something like that, got, I want to say incriminating, but pretty much got dirt on her and used it against her to get his bidding. And so that's one thing, again, that I looked at, was that it was this compromise of mental health where somebody was in a mentally weak situation. And that's one thing I've just noticed, as a pattern. And again, this is not for everyone. There are some people who are just straight up evil, some people who run to the dark side. But it's really this interesting thing of I wanted to analyze, why do good people go to the dark side? And again, I think a lot has to do with just reflecting on my own experience with mental health and others around me, was that I believe that when you're in a mentally traumatic state of mind, your mind wants immediate gratification. It wants something, I think that, again, going back to forms of escapism, alcohol, drugs, just vegging out and not focusing on being productive, watching TV and video games, and just all these ways of distracting your mind from the reality outside of it. Again, so I think that is something that leads to people making very, very bad choices, and even to the point where it becomes evil. And I think a lot of that has to do with, once you escape, like I said, you're freed from that mental damage, that wounded mind. And so once you go out of that, once the escapism is removed, you're back in your hell, so to speak. And so there's just that immediate desire to get back out. And so I think that when people make extremely, extremely bad choices, there's a certain point of where they feel trapped. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of addictions and mindful of making those compromised choices in a mentally damaged state of mind. Because the more and more you do it, the more and more you're likely to do it and do worse things. And so again, it's just really important. It goes back to that, you either die the hero or you live long enough to become the villain. And so that's why it's very important to be mindful of our mental health, is because if you don't keep it in check, there will be a day where you wake up and you're the villain, and you'll feel like you can't turn back. And I think that's a lot of times where people become, I don't want to say serial evil people, but that they do it on such a catastrophic level, to where they are lost, or at least, the very least, they think lost. And so again, I just really want people to be self-aware of their own mental state and their own forms of escapism and their own compromised choices, because if you let it go unchecked, there will be a day where it defeats you, and you commit an act that you can't be forgiven for, at the very least, that you need to be punished for. And again, to that, I think that's something that's important, because I feel like that's the other part that leads to, I say, evil acts, or various repetitive evil acts, is that there's a point where you screw up so much, or you make such an epically bad choice, an epically bad act, that you feel like a lost cause, you feel unforgivable, and so you continue that behavior. I know that was one thing that I struggled with when I was deeply into my depression, was this point of checking out and not being very interactive with my family. And as I'm, I was self-aware of that, as I saw that, affecting my children and my relationship with my wife, where I was not making a lot of eye contact, not making a lot of conversations. I was very non-interactive. Once I started seeing that affect them, for a little while, it actually made it worse for me, because I felt so ashamed and so like I had failed them. I felt like I was unforgivable, what I had done, that I had let my pain seep into the lives and relationships I had around me. And so there was a little while where that misbehavior caused it easier for me to continue it. And so again, fortunately, I was able to be mindful and try to figure out, what I needed to do to change it. And like I said, a big part of it was me realizing that, I can't be perfect, but just to constantly try to improve, constantly be conscious of what I'm doing. And again, not letting my depression affect my behavior, especially when I was around my family. There are points where I'm allowed to, I would say, mentally check out of what's going on around me and just dwell on what's happening and what's happened to me. But I just need to be very conscious of this decisions I'm making or not making, and just make sure that I'm not allowing my mental health to affect my personal life, for me to make a place for it and reflect on it, but not let it seep into my actions and control my actions. Because again, that was one of those things where, just looking at how people become evil, or at the very least, they don't necessarily become evil, but they partake in evil, and just trying to educate so that people will stop their behavior before they get there, stop their behavior before they do turn to the dark side, and in fact, just create immense pain in the lives and relationships they have around them. Because again, I think a lot of this stuff isn't discussed. Like I said, that I feel like we look at this bad behavior, and we say it's unacceptable, which it is, and we say that there's no reason, which that isn't true. There's no good reason. That's completely true. But there is a reason, because without a reason, people don't act. It's a bad reason, but it is a reason. And it's really important to make that distinction, because by saying that there's no reason, then how in the world are we going to stop it? How in the world are we going to be able to decipher what's causing this evil behavior and prevent it from continuing if there's no reason behind it? Again, it's just almost like it's like a meteor, where you just like, it's, if it hits you, and we can't do anything about it. And I'm like, no, it is certainly, again, there are some people who do just are straight up evil, and that can't be prevented. But I do think a lot of the horrific things that happen in life can be prevented, or at the very least minimized, by becoming self-aware and by educating society on mental health and how it really affects us all. Because again, I think like I said at the intro, the stigma behind it is straitjackets and take away the sharp objects for the mentally ill. And it's like, it's such a broad thing. And that's why I usually like to use the term mentally unhappy. The idea being is that in your mental state, you're not happy. Because I don't like to say mentally ill, because I just know that people are just thinking, you pop pills, you're lobotomized, or you're just a psycho if you're not. And again, that's just why so many people don't get help, and why so many people don't open up, as they're terrified of being labeled as this person that's hopeless, this person that doesn't think rationally. And it's like, being objective, I don't think anybody in the world thinks rationally 100% of the time. If you're honest, nobody in this universe thinks rationally 100% of the time. We all have our emotions. We all have our personal painful experiences that influence how we go about life. And again, I feel like this standard of perfection, the standard of never faltering, is again why so many people don't get help, is they're terrified of being real about how they feel, about how they act. And again, I feel like it's that alienation and that inability to talk about your demons, about what's troubling you, about intimate, painful, vulnerable situations that leads people to becoming the villain. And so again, I want people to be educated and be knowledgeable and self-reflect so that they can stop that pattern and help themselves and save others. Again, not one of us is thinking rationally 100% of the time. And again, it's a very powerful force within us, our emotions, that drives us to actions. And then we realize what we've done. And again, the cycle is a lot of times is we try to justify it. We try to justify why we did that or why we didn't do that, why we said that or didn't say it, rather than just realizing the mistake and trying to correct it and see. Because again, if we're honest with our mistakes, we're honest with our shortcomings, a lot of times we're judged for it. Hence why we don't talk about it. Hence why we won't admit our errors. But again, I really think that we can change these patterns. I really think that we can minimize considerably the mental damage that is being caused throughout this country. And a big part of it is just being able to talk about what's really going on. How do you really feel? It doesn't necessarily mean what actually was inflicted on you, but if you are distraught, you should be able to say and not be judged. And because a lot of times, like I said, you speak your truth, and somebody will judge how, well, that's nothing, that shouldn't have set you off. You should be stronger. And again, so it's just people shut down and they don't talk about it. But it's really important to be truthful with how we're feeling and what's going on, so that we can heal it, so we can fix it, rather than just deny it exists until it consumes us. Because a lot of times, like I said, it's that denying our pain and denying the effects it has on how we have relationships or don't have relationships, and then it surfaces I don't want to say unknown to us, but it like I said, it consumes us, it controls us until it's too late, and then we become the villain. And it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be able to be talked about so that we can stop the vicious cycle. As always, good luck and good night.